If I had to sum up the God of War reboot in one word, it would be uncompromised. The Norse saga has combat that is both aesthetically appealing and mechanically deep. It features a world that is both breathtaking to look at and rich in content. Its narrative can be epic and exhilarating in one moment, then quiet and contemplative the next. God of War can have it both ways. Its artistic and cinematic presentation never once hinders it from being a thoroughly fun and meaty video game. And all of this is realized most completely in Ragnarök. While I'll always have a soft spot for the simplicity of the 2018 game, and would like to make a video on it eventually, I can't deny that it's Ragnarök which represents the series at its height, both mechanically and narratively. But this depth doesn't come at the cost of focused game design. Unlike so many of its contemporaries in this generation, Ragnarök doesn't try to be too many things at once. At its core, there are really only three components of the game that the entire experience is built around: its combat, its world, and its story. The gameplay appeal for God of War has always been in its combat. The Norse Games offer decent enough traversal and puzzle mechanics to break up play, but combat remains at the heart of the games mechanically. And it absolutely delivers. Souls-like combat systems are usually about selling a power fantasy. The Ghost games sell the samurai fantasy, EA's new Star Wars games sell the Jedi fantasy, and FromSoft games usually sell something akin to a David versus Goliath type fantasy. Ragnarok's power fantasy remains the exact same one from the original God of War: unrestrained brutality. You're supposed to feel like Goliath in this game, pummeling enemies big and small alike with unceasing power. The animations, of course, sell this fantasy masterfully, but the pure mechanics of the combat system do a lot of the work too. Controlled aggression is the central principle for mastering God of War's combat. Offense is always the best defense for Kratos. The best way to assure an enemy can't attack you is to keep them right in front of you. And the player is given ample tools to keep them there. Developing a loop of abilities, combos, and arrow volleys to keep an enemy chain-locked in CC really does fulfill the power fantasy of winning through overpowering force. In this way, Ragnarok's combat mechanics are actually much closer to the original Greek games than they are to Elden Ring or Jedi Survivor. Defensive abilities still find their place in this system though. The tight camera angle and relatively delayed way in which Kratos switches targets means you'll have to dodge or block sometimes. But mastering the combat mechanics means learning to use these defensive tools as efficiently as possible. Evades are always superior to dodge rolls. Parrying is always superior to blocking. The ideal is for the player to transition from defense to offense as quickly and seamlessly as possible. Because of that, defensive tools actually serve to emphasize the brutality fantasy. Shrugging off an attack is one thing, but turning an enemy's attack back on them only makes Kratos feel more unstoppable. Put simply, if you go more than a second in combat as Kratos without dealing damage, you're doing it wrong. That doesn't follow for Atreus' new combat system, though. He has to play far more reactively and defensively than his father does, and I'd count that as a good thing. Combat systems are the primary way that personalities are conveyed through gameplay, so these two should play differently. Kratos' ruthless aggression fits his protective instincts, but a more opportunistic and precision-based system fits better for Atreus. To create that system, the devs gave Atreus far less crowd control abilities than Kratos does, and consequently made him far worse at dealing with multiple enemies at once. He's compensated though by having a bevy of evasive moves. He can get off 3 light attacks in the time it takes Kratos to get off 1, leap 10 feet away the moment more enemies come near him, and then finish off the same target with some quick arrow shots. This is a very different fantasy than Kratos has, but it's not necessarily worse. It's good fun to play as an opportunistic scrapper, weaving quickly between quick bursts of melee and more sustained range volleys. I wouldn't say it quite lives up to the high bar set by Kratos' system, but it's still a very competent one. And really, any imperfections in Atreus' combat only serves to emphasize how close Kratos' gets to perfection. Ragnarok gets away with so much more window dressing than I've seen any other game in this generation do. All of the game's most beautiful vistas look over mostly unexplorable environments. Now, I love open world games that allow the player to explore everything they can see, but there is something to be said about God of War's approach too. The scale and detail on display makes the Norse realms feel far more grand and storied than any fully open world game could do. They suggest that this world is bigger than the game it contextualizes. Ironically, I find that this makes Ragnarok feel less gamey and arbitrary than some fully open world games. And it also just makes the Norse pantheon look ridiculously beautiful. This game had to sell 9 distinct atmospheres, and not one of them fails to deliver. Nature is always exaggerated and enchanted, mythological elements are intricately woven into the environment, and scattered architecture helps tell the stories of each realm's unique cultures and histories. This game is worthy of the pagan myths that inspired it. And for how varied the realms are, each still manages to convey the distinct ambience of death brought on by Fimbulwinter. It's of course felt most starkly in Midgard, but the empty towns of Vanaheim and war-torn pathways of Elfheim each convey how decadent this world has become under Odin's rule. And then there's the actual content to be found in that world. I really appreciate how much Ragnarok's optional content enriches the game, rather than just bloating it up with recycled content. So many epic scenes, set pieces, and stories occur in completely optional missions. The best side missions in this game would be standout main missions in lesser games. I also love the narrative depth to be found in the content. Ragnarok's characters are complex enough to be given secondary arcs and side missions that further develops them beyond the main plot. Like the world, these missions suggest that the game's central characters are bigger and more nuanced than any one singular story, which is really fitting for characters derived from various myths and folklores. Ragnarok side content adds further depth, beauty, and wonder to a story that already wasn't lacking for any of those things. The Norse saga has been excellent at threading the needle between making its story both epic and personal. Its characters feel like unstoppable gods and vulnerable humans. Its plot has grandiose and bombastic moments intersect with quiet and contemplative ones. The tone of the story offers all the enchantment and wonder you'd expect to get out of a fantasy story, along with all the introspection you'd expect to get out of a realistic novel. The secret for how God of War threads this narrative needle comes with how it contextualizes all of its mythological elements. In God of War, fantasy is larger than life, but it isn't disconnected from life. The mythological ambience undergirding all of Ragnarok's story is ultimately grounded upon starkly human themes. Atreus and Angrboda sneaking into Gorilla's home has all the wonder and spectacle of a fairy tale, along with the added subtext of substance abuse and generational trauma. Atreus is rebellious and deceptive because he's the god of mischief, but also because he's a teenager. The main setup for the story involves a group of gods trying to prevent the prophesized end of the world. But really, at its center, it's a story about a father who doesn't want to send his son off to war. It's motivations like these that really humanizes the Norse pantheon. The web of characters in Ragnarok are all multi-layered enough to feel like real people. But their simple motivations and ideals allows every character to contrast with another. Characters are defined by their idealism, or by their cynicism. They propose war, pacifism, and everything in between. Each is in some way tormented by their past and by their future. Kratos himself makes it abundantly clear where he stands in all this. He won't take part in warfare during Ragnarok. And this is understandable enough, given his past. But as more and more prophecies show his allies taking part in the battle, and as the plot pushes him closer and closer to conflict with Odin, staying out of the war becomes less and less feasible for him. There's a real sense of building dread as Ragnarok becomes more inevitable, as all the prophesized events surrounding it fall in their place. As tensions rise between parties, convictions clash with convictions, and bonds break between family. And then, right in the middle of the game, as everything seems to be falling apart, the simplest character in the entire story utters one line which, ultimately, brings it all back together.
It's about understanding.
Understanding what?
The nature of a thing's more important than the form of a thing.
I'm going to argue that this is the most important line in the game. It basically serves as the thesis to everything the story is getting at. But first, we have to define our terms. The philosophy professors at my university would probably grumble about the way these two words are used, but in terms of Ragnarok's story, the word form always refers to the immutable aspects of a person, while nature always refers to the parts of their identity that they can control. Thus, Brock's form is that of a partially unsouled dwarf. There's nothing he can do to change that. But his nature is that of a master blacksmith. Recognizing this fact about nature is the key way all of Ragnarok's characters defy the prophecies and fates that haunt them. But notice that Brock didn't say the form doesn't matter at all. This is what Kratos struggles with throughout the story. His form is clearly that of a god killer, and it's not going to change. Partly because he's the main character of a video game franchise called God of War, and on a less meta level, because that's simply the role prophecy has him playing. Circumstances will force him to fight in Ragnarok. God of War is realistic enough to acknowledge that there are many things outside of our control, but it's also optimistic enough to still insist that the things in our control are the more important. And the prime example of this is Kratos. While he can't control his form, he does, in the end, control how it's used. The Norns mock him by saying,
"Should I bring him a crown then? He still slays gods, but now he's sad about it?"
but in the end, this line is contradicted. It's pejorative to call it merely sadness, but Kratos' newfound restraint, his preference for mercy, and sincere desire to be better is genuinely the only thing that turns Ragnarok from a vengeance-filled rampage through Asgard into a methodical and precise attack focused on bringing justice to one man. It's the fact that he no longer wants to wage war that makes him the perfect man to lead men into it when it becomes unavoidable. None of the prophecies could see this because all of them were too macro to see the really important details surrounding the conflict. They saw the form of Ragnarok, but not its nature. Kratos can't renounce his warrior identity, but he can choose to redeem it. And doing so earns him a reward far better than any crown. This motif of putting nature over form is the central theme of every one of Ragnarok's stories. It resolves the coming-of-age stories for Atreus, Angrboda, and Thrud. Each of them must come to terms with the ways that they have been shaped by their flawed parental figures. But, more importantly, each also needs to eventually recognize that their parents don't have to shape the choices they make. Mimir and Freya each need to learn similar lessons regarding their own past failings. And the central fault of the Aesir is them putting form above nature. That of course fuels their various prejudices, but even the way they treat themselves ends up distorted. Odin's treatment of Thor is particularly cruel.
Why isn't he dead? Are you talking? Who told you to do that? You don't talk! You don't think! I think! You kill! It's a simple fucking concept!
Thor's last-second redemption is then particularly tragic for how short-lived it is, but it's also the most focused redemption for that very reason. Thor betraying Odin accomplishes nothing on a plot level aside from immediately resulting in his death. Unlike other characters, he gets no material reward for choosing to be better, aside from getting to be better. The context of his ending, though, suggests that that was a worthy enough trade-off to make. And really, it is context that makes all the difference in God of War Ragnarok. It's the reason the game can have it both ways. Its action can be brutal and visceral without being senseless. Its rendition of the Norse pantheon can be otherworldly without being inhuman. And its last hours can be epic, awe-inspiring, and inspirational. while still leaving the player feeling devastated in its final minutes.